And I also I play a lot with texture as well. I love things like burlap, and also but very silky fabrics as well.
The opportunity to work big in an environment. I enjoy that.
Today we have two guests on the Temple Arts podcast, Nancy J. Rodwan and Jada Bowden. They are the artists behind Saginaw Art Museum's current exhibition, Bright Moments and Shifting Shadows, on display through August 31st. Nancy Rodwan is known for transforming everyday objects into new and unexpected forms, using a variety of traditional and contemporary techniques to create ethereal fiber art. Jada Bowden brings a bold and experimental edge to the world of fiber arts. Her innovative use of unconventional materials and techniques challenges traditional textile artistry. Listen in to learn more about the creation of each artist's work and plan to see the exhibition. Nancy and Jada, thank you so much for joining me here on the Temple Arts podcast. We are so excited to have your current exhibition, Bright Moments and Shifting Shadows, at the Saginaw Art Museum. Welcome to the podcast, and really interested in learning more about the work that you have made and some of the processes as well as the thought behind it, both individually and collectively. I think having a group show like this with both of your work provides some interesting contrast for viewers and visitors. We'll jump right in here. We are on a podcast, so maybe for those who haven't seen your work in person or with other visuals, how would each of you describe the work that you're doing?
Jada, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that my work has a lot of texture. So texture would be like the number one word that I would use. It's also large scale. When I have the opportunity to work big in an environment, I enjoy that. So taking up lots of space, playing with the environment. But texture, a lot of texture.
And how about yourself, Nancy?
My fiber work involves a lot of stitchery, all hand stitched. I don't use the machine for any of the things that are in the exhibit. And I also I play a lot with texture as well. I love things like burlap, and also but very silky fabrics as well. And color is very important to me. And I know that when Ben first approached us about doing this work and we got familiar with the space, I played with the space a lot in the pieces that I created for the show. I wanted to make sure, because of all the natural light that's in the space, I wanted to make sure that my pieces would create these fantastic shadows that would change throughout the course of the day as you know the sun moved from one end of the room to the other. But I also took in the color scheme of the artisan room and chose colors for my pieces that really played off of those.
Yeah, you mentioned there a little about the shadows and the way that the environment is interacting with your work. And the title of the show, Bright Moments and Shifting Shadows, sort of speaks to that. But I'd love to hear from you both a little bit about the development of that title, and maybe some alternative titles that you might have thought of, and how you settled on that particular titling.
Well, it's kind of funny because we sat down, we met at a library, and we're just like writing down ideas and thoughts for the show. And then once we both started creating pieces, two words kept coming up, brightness and shadows. And really, I don't think we had another title. We decided when we came up with that one, we're like, oh, well, let's throw some more ideas around. And then we both just felt that one suited it well.
Yeah.
Is that right,
Yeah, I like
Jada?
the brainstorming process. Yeah, I think the brainstorming process was really fun. We would just talk, and both of us would write notes and then compare. And the Bright Moments and Shifting Shadows was really the title. The title.
Yeah, that's sort of what ended up sticking, huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, moving a little bit into speaking about some of the process of the creation of the works, Nancy, you mentioned the stitchery that was involved in the creation of your pieces. Was that a real conscientious decision on your part, or in terms of sort of rejection of the machine, or the sewing with a machine, or was there a different, more practical reason for using hand stitchery?
Well, I do not reject the machine. The machine definitely has its purpose, but when I first started making fiber art in 2015, when I was doing my purged project, where people were giving me things that they were throwing away, and I was transforming these ordinary objects into art. And several people gave me articles of clothing or shoes or scarves. And so one of the pieces in the show is from that project. It's called Divided, and it was made from my friend's dress. And I cut it up and created it into a map of the country, where each state is just hanging from each other. But anyway, so that was one of my first times of really getting into stitchery. And then during the pandemic, I found that just the process of stitching was very meditative for me. And in some of the darker moments of that time when we're all sequestered, it felt really good to just sit down and pick up a needle and some embroidery floss and create with it. And a couple of my pieces in this show have very thick borders that are just hand stitches that go all the way around the piece. And there's something I don't know, kind of zen-like in that activity of just, you can do this thing that you have to pay attention to what you're doing to create the stitches that you want, but your mind is also free to explore other ideas and other creations that you want to approach next.
Yeah, that's really a interesting description. Jada, for your part, you're working with scale, lots of pieces, so small pieces, but then the way that you put those together create a larger piece. Can you describe a little bit of the process that you're using in creating many of the works that you have in the exhibition?
Yeah, sure. So I work a lot with repurposed materials, so fabric, clothes, even old art I'll cut up and put into the whatever the next work is. So there was an exhibition that Nancy and I were in previously, and so the piece that I made for that has been cut up and incorporated into these. Otherwise, just like more clothes, I cut it into strips, and then kind of have a general idea of like sort of the size that I'm looking for, or kind of what I'm trying to accomplish, maybe some of the symbolism or like thematic development. But then also just working very meditatively, kind of losing myself in it for a minute, taking steps backward, looking at the piece, seeing where I want to make edits. Even within some of the pieces, like the big ceilings and the molten, like I started it and then cut it up, flipped things around until it got to a place where I liked it and it felt good, felt finished.
It's interesting because both of you have mentioned this use of repurposed materials in your work, and it makes me curious about how that came to be for each of you, whether, again, it was sort of a real conscientious decision, or if this was something that you had worked in previously or seen previously. Nancy, maybe you can describe a little bit of how that came to be. I know you mentioned that previous project, but I'm curious how each of you sort of have approached gathering of materials that are to be repurposed, because there's lots of materials that could potentially be repurposed. but even in that selection process, there has to be some distinguishing of what you use or what you don't use. So maybe each of you could comment on that.
Sure. Like I said, with my purge project, people gave me everything from old televisions to garlic presses and articles of clothing and scarves and so for me it was the biggest creative challenge of my life was trying to figure out what to do with these things and it began with the process of me breaking these items down and I have worked with repurposed material even before my purge project. I grew up in a poor household where, art was encouraged, but we couldn't afford art supplies. So we did what we could with what we had, and we got pretty creative with that. But as far as with fiber, it's actually a pretty, I put on some weight, so I have all these clothes in my closet that no longer fit. So that's a really great source of material. But there's also like my husband doesn't go to the office anymore, so all of his ties became fair game for me. But then when people realize that you do use repurposed material before they throw something out, they ask me if I want it, which is wonderful. And I know when Jada and I were in the exhibit together that she mentioned, she asked all the other artists if they had anything that they didn't want anymore, a ripped pair of socks or stained napkins that you're just not going to use. And so we contributed to her piece, but it is tricky. There are times when I'll go to neighborhood yard sales and pick up some old piece of clothing that somebody's getting rid of and think it's a great find because I got it for $2 and I'll bring it home, and then once I get it in the studio I realize that this texture is really just not something I'm interested in. It doesn't, I don't. So the process really for me is in deciding what can be reused and what can't is once I get it into the studio. And I've have pieces up there that have been in my studio for years because I was so attracted to them, but whenever I'm working on a piece they just don't mix well, with the concept that I have in actual texture or colors of the fabric. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so. How about yourself, Jada?
Yeah, I think like from a young age, like creativity, self-sufficiency, resilience, and like how you can take something and make the most of it. There were a lot of people in my family that were into sewing. I preferred like crazy quilts where you take old stuff and like put them together. What you can do with scraps, I always enjoyed that. And then I got into sculpture when I went to school, and at the time I was going to school, like installation work was big. Like Magdalena Abacanovich, like her large scale fiber works were influential. And then the choice of materials really, again, the fiber part of that. Fiber is very accessible to me. People are always getting rid of old clothes or sheets or things always wear out. They might have holes, but there's still like this large portion of it that's still valuable, still has value, and just figuring out how to work from that and make the most of it has been influential.
Yeah, that's really a neat perspective of just thinking about how fiber is everywhere. Cloth is everywhere in our environments, and myself and my wife, we go to thrift stores, and there's just racks and racks of different textures and discarded clothing and things like that. So it feels like that accessibility is really interesting thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. And it's fun too, like when you're working with stuff over the years, like you start to see the different patterns that have taken place over the years, and there becomes like this sort of collective element to it. Oh, that's my friend, that's from the art show, that's from the 70s. That kind of stuff is fun too.
Yeah, very good. In this exhibition that we have at the Saginaw Art Museum and Gardens, each of your work is your own work. You haven't collaborated together to create another object or another piece of work with both of your artistic talents. Is that ever something that you have considered or explored, either with each other or with other artists?
No, I would definitely be up for that in working with Jada, because her technique, mine is all stitchery and hers is all knots. You know, she's knotting this fabric to create these huge, huge pieces that have many layers to them. And you know, some of the pieces that are in the exhibit now have these pockets that are like these nests and are just wonderful. And so you know, but it would take a lot of planning for us to figure out how to incorporate her knotting. I mean, that's one thing I love about her work, is that there's no stitches, there's no glue, there's nothing, it's all knotting. But it would be fun to collaborate, but it would definitely take a lot of planning.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. I actually just had a collaboration with Andy T and Michael Nagara, like group show collaborations. Have been the path I've been on.
Well, if you do, I've got my eyes open. I'll be watching.
Okay, we'll let you know.
Yeah. You know, with your different approaches to fiber and the joining of different materials, what kinds of challenges do you each run into as you're working on a piece that you might find unique to the materials or the processes that you're using? Can you tell our listeners a little more about those challenges?
Well, it's it's interesting because different types of fabric respond differently to how you're using them. Some just, you know, don't, if you want to dye it, it may not take the dye in the way that you wanted it to. Sometimes that produces a happy accident where you end up with something really spectacular, but not what you wanted. But it's also, you know, like I said, I really like burlap because you know, you can see through it and it's got this great texture. But it can be very unforgiving. It falls apart very easily. Sometimes, you know, you think you have what you wanted stitched on there well, and it just, you know, kind of falls off. So those have been some of the challenges for me, are just, you know, the technique that I want to approach this piece with may not work because of the fabric that I'm using.
And how about yourself, Jada?
My challenge is, I don't know. I feel like my challenge is more myself than the materials. Like maybe if I'm overthinking or putting too much pressure on an idea and the material doesn't want to do that, figuring out like how to work with the material to do more like what it wants to do and compromising. But I think some of that opening stuff up and starting over, cutting parts out and adding new parts in, like the process that I have, not developed, but that I use, is pretty it lends itself to that. So if something starts to fall apart, I can reknot it, I can add more to it, and it still works.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of any of your material, any of your pieces being cut apart. You know, that sort of like, there's part of me that just says, no, don't do it. It's good.
I think storage, right? Storage is also it's not a part of the material, but just like at some point you only have so much space for things. So
yeah,
make them new, make them fresh.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You know, if there was one or two things that you wanted people to walk away with from viewing your work, you know, could you maybe comment on that? You know, as people are going through the gallery, are there some ideas or themes that you feel like would be valuable for them to really consider as they view each of your works?
I guess I'll go first. A lot of my work is inspired by literature, music, and current events. Um, I have one piece in the exhibit right now that is called As Thee Wish, that is inspired by all of the many fables from many cultures about, a genie or a magical beast that is released from a bottle or a lamp and grants 3 wishes. Um, and I played with that idea of the 3 wishes, and there's actually a box in the museum um, where we're encouraging people to add wishes to this box, to write down their 3 wishes and put it in. And I'm going to take those wishes and make an installation based on them. But I also have 2 pieces in the exhibit that have to deal with the circus. One is honoring the Barnum and Bailey Ringling Brothers Circus, who stopped using animal acts, I think in 2017. And so I'm kind of paying a little tribute to them for, cutting out the cruelty aspect of having animals in the circus. And another one of my pieces is all about memory. And it's made up of, all articles of clothing that either belong to me or people who I love. And, as I was creating this piece, all these memories flooded back with, oh, well, you wore this to, this event, the opening of this film or whatever. So I like for people to understand that I have a sense of humor,
Mm.
and that I try to put some joy into my work, and I feel like the colors and the titles sort of reflect that.
And Jada, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think I don't have anything particular, like a message with it, but I think that I would like, as people view it, I hope that they can enjoy it and that they are able to see, I don't know, like maybe be inspired or like see things. Maybe it brings out ideas to them, or oh, I want to try that material, or they can make up stories based on what they're seeing. Like a free association, I think would be nice if people were able to free associate with the work and kind of learn more about themselves too.
Well, Nancy, Jada, thank you so much for sharing your time and your work with the Saginaw Art Museum and Gardens community. We're looking forward to continuing to have the exhibition here at the museum into the late summer. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you both, and I wish you all the best and as you continue to make your art.
Yes, thank you for having us. We've had fun.
Thank you for listening to the Temple Arts Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and making a donation to the arts through SaginawArtMuseum.org or TempleTheater.com. This will allow us to continue to bring enriching program to Saginaw and beyond.